In the shadows of forgotten wars and buried experiments, truth becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. Project Orpheus was meant to erase the past, its files, its victims, its sins. But when a traumatized little girl walks into a police station begging for justice, she unravels a conspiracy that reaches far beyond what anyone imagined. What begins as a desperate rescue soon turns into a high-stakes mission across continents, where ex-soldiers, broken families, and haunted survivors must confront the memories they were forced to forget. This is a story about voices lost to silence, and those brave enough to hear them again. Late afternoon, the sun was slowly sinking behind the rusted tin roofs of Maple Ridge, a quiet coastal town seemingly forgotten by time. The wind from the sea swept through the main road, carrying with it the scent of salt and something colder, darker, unsettling. It rustled the American flag hanging proudly on a tall pole in front of the iron tap bar. In the blood-orange glow of dusk, the flag flapped like a silent reminder of a pride long faded. David Thompson stepped through the aged wooden door of the bar. He wore a worn khaki jacket, dusty combat boots, and the weary gaze of a man just returned from a battlefield. His short-cropped hair, straight back, and disciplined steps gave off a presence that made people cautious, not because he was threatening, but because he had clearly seen things most hadn't. He wasn't looking for attention, or even a greeting. He just wanted silence. Inside, the bar was a world of aged oak, dim amber lights, nicotine-soaked walls, and old country music whispering from a dusty jukebox in the far corner. It wasn't crowded, just a few locals scattered at tables and booths. Dock workers, truck drivers, retirees. People anchored in routine, slowly dissolving into alcohol and soft regrets. David took a seat at the bar, far from the others, and quietly ordered a beer. The bartender was a young woman named Sarah, early 20s, soft-spoken, with sad brown eyes and a kind of weariness in her voice that didn't yet match her youth. She glanced at David, just a brief, curious look, not judgmental, just quietly observing. She slid him the bottle without a word. David nodded in thanks, but said nothing. He wasn't here to make friends. This was one of the few places still open late that wasn't drowning in noise or shallow laughter. He just needed a drink, and maybe a place where the memories weren't louder than the room. But that silence didn't last long. Tony Russo, the owner, emerged from the back room. Mid-40s, stocky build, sweat-stained collar, and a red face from too many years drinking more than he worked. He stopped in his tracks the moment he saw David sitting alone. His eyes flickered with recognition, then narrowed with something darker, contempt. He marched up to the bar, motioned for Sarah to step back, and squared off behind the counter. "Who are you?" Tony asked, his voice curt, disdainful. David sipped his beer, not turning. "Just a customer." Tony gave a dry, mocking chuckle. "Didn't ask what you were drinking. I asked what you're doing here." The bar grew quieter. A few patrons turned subtly, ears pricked. An older man near the door muttered something to his friend but made no move. David set the bottle down and turned toward Tony, looking him square in the eye. "Just got discharged. Looking for a quiet drink." Tony sneered. His voice rose a little, loud enough for others to hear. "Ah, a soldier. You guys always think you're heroes. Come back home, expect to be treated like royalty." "No one's asking for royalty," David said calmly. "Just a beer. Like everyone else." Sarah looked like she wanted to intervene, but Tony waved her off. "We don't serve people like you," Tony snapped. "Soldiers come back with their trauma, their PTSD, their anger. Stir up trouble. I don't need any of that in my bar." David raised an eyebrow. Silence stretched between them. But instead of getting angry, David just let out a breath. There was no fury in his eyes, only disappointment. Deep, bone-tired disappointment. "You think hanging that flag out front makes you a patriot?" he asked, voice low but sharp as a blade. "Got it. He stood, pulled out his wallet, and laid exact change for the beer on the bar, down to the last coin. Then he turned and walked out, silent, his steps steady. The bar door shut behind him with a dull thud, cutting the room in half, between a man who had seen war and those too cowardly to respect it. Sarah stood still, staring at the closed door. No one spoke. The room hung in awkward silence, ashamed but afraid. David didn't say another word. Outside under the street lamp, the wind brushed through his hair, smelling of sea and memory. He pulled out his phone and opened a group chat labeled, SEAL Team 8, Brothers in Arms. Funny thing happened today. Got kicked out of a bar with an American flag on the front. Guess the owner didn't like my uniform. That was all. No whining. No rage. Just the facts. 30 seconds later, a reply appeared. Send the address. The sun had vanished behind the horizon, leaving the town of Maple Ridge cloaked in the kind of darkness that doesn't just settle, it seeps. Streetlights flickered on, humming with electricity, casting thin halos onto empty sidewalks. The sea murmured in the distance, a constant, aching lullaby. David Thompson drove down a narrow road lined with shuttered shops and crumbling fences. His truck was old, military-grade, coated in dust and scratches that refused to be washed away, like scars. He didn't mind. It fit him. Or maybe, he fit it. He arrived at a small one-story house on the edge of town, half swallowed by weeds and disrepair. It had once belonged to his parents, before the cancer took his mother and grief took his father. Now it belonged to him, not by choice, but by blood and circumstance. The inside smelled of dust and old paper. Faint outlines of picture frames still hung on the walls, their contents long gone. He didn't have the heart to replace them. Some wounds didn't want healing. They wanted silence. David dropped his duffel by the door and sank onto the couch. He stared at the ceiling, but didn't see it. Instead, his mind unspooled. Gunfire. Sandstorms. Screams. The blast that ripped Jenkins apart. The child in Fallujah who never dropped the toy that was wired to explode. Blood on his boots. He forced his eyes shut. Breathed through his nose. Counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. The technique they'd taught him during therapy in Germany. Breathe. Anchor yourself. But it only worked sometimes. Tonight wasn't one of those times. The buzz of his phone broke the spiral. He picked it up, his fingers slightly trembling, and read the message. Logan. Tony Russo. Bones Iron Tap. Dishonorable discharge 2009, smuggling weapons to cartels through private contracts in Mexico. He covered it up. I'll send the file. David blinked. Mike. This the same guy who called us ticking bombs? Cute. We've got a list of witnesses. Ryan. Bet he never thought one of us would walk into his bar. He's just scared, Dave. Cowards always are. David didn't reply. Not yet. He looked around his dark, empty house and felt the weight settle back on his shoulders. These men, Logan, Mike, Ryan, they were his brothers, more than blood. SEAL Team 8 had fought together for over a decade. Shared foxholes, battlefields, burned pits, and Christmases overseas. They didn't just have his back. They were his back. And yet, back home, they were ghosts in their own country. Misunderstood. Feared. Rejected. David stood slowly and walked into the kitchen. He opened the fridge, saw nothing but bottled water and a half-eaten sandwich from the airport. He didn't feel hungry anyway. He closed it again and reached for the drawer under the sink. Inside was a rusted tin box. He opened it. Dog tags, folded letters, and a photo, worn and bent. It was the team, standing on the tarmac in Kandahar. Dusty. smiling. Whole. Back when they were all still alive. His fingers hovered over Jenkins' tag. He remembered the way Jenkins used to hum Sinatra during recon missions. The way he joked about opening a pizza shop back in Brooklyn. The way he died, shielding a local girl during an ambush. David swallowed hard. The grief never faded. It just changed shape. He carried the box to the living room and set it beside the couch. Then, he pulled out a notebook. On the cover, After Action, Personal. Inside, hundreds of lines, each one a memory, a loss, a thought too heavy to speak aloud. Tonight, he added a new entry. May 11th. First day back. Denied a beer because I wore a uniform. I didn't argue. Didn't shout. Just walked away. But inside, something broke. Not because of the insult, but because I realized this is what home feels like now. Foreign. Suspicious. Like I never left the battlefield. Just changed terrain. He stopped. Closed the notebook. And sat in silence for a long time. Elsewhere, in a cramped apartment above a pawn shop downtown, a woman read the headlines on her cracked phone screen. Local veteran ejected from bar after owner refuses service. Tensions rise as SEAL team member publicly shamed. Her name was Lena Marks, an investigative journalist who'd spent years chasing corruption in the underbelly of military contracts. She had dark circles under her eyes and a mind that never rested. She knew the name Tony Russo. And the more she read, the more something didn't add up. She typed a message. To David Thompson. I think we need to talk. I know who Russo is. And I think he's hiding something bigger. Meet? The next morning, David sat at the docks, watching the sun rise over the water. It was peaceful, in the way only nature can be. He heard footsteps behind him and didn't turn. He already knew. Figured I'd find you here, said Logan. 6'3", built like a linebacker, with sunburned skin and sharp green eyes. He dropped a coffee beside David and sat. You drove all the way from Portland? Damn right, Logan said. Saw your message and knew it wasn't just about a bar. It's never just a bar. David finally smiled, thin, but real. You bring trouble? Always, Logan grinned. They sipped their coffee in silence. Two soldiers who had bled together, now trying to breathe in a world that didn't know what to do with them. You really want to go after Russo? David asked. Don't have to, Logan replied. He's going to hang himself. All we have to do is show people the rope. David looked at the waves. He dishonored the flag he hides behind. Yeah, Logan said. But you didn't. Later that day, David met Lena at the community library. She was sharp, articulate, and visibly exhausted from years of chasing ghosts through court documents and redacted files. But her voice was clear and steady as she laid out folders on the table. Tony Russo has ties to at least 3 private military contractors. He ran guns through border checkpoints, laundered money through dummy construction companies, and paid off officials. He's not just a bar owner. He's a war profiteer. David looked through the files, photos, receipts, emails. You've been digging a while. I tried getting it to the press years ago, she said. No one wanted to touch it. But now, you're the headline. A real veteran, shamed. That opens doors. People are watching. David's jaw clenched. I'm not interested in fame. You don't need to be, she said. You just need to tell the truth. And I'll do the rest. That night, the town of Maple Ridge watched in silence as a video went viral. David, sitting on his front porch, speaking plainly into the camera. My name is David Thompson. I served 12 years with the Navy SEALs. I've seen war. I've lost brothers. I came home hoping for peace, and was met with hate. Not from enemies, but from a man who wears patriotism like armor, while betraying everything it stands for. His name is Tony Russo. He kicked me out of his bar for being a soldier. But this isn't just about a beer. This is about truth. About honor. And about justice. The video ended with silence. No dramatic music. No slogans. Just David's tired, steady eyes staring into the soul of anyone watching. It spread like wildfire. Veterans across the country shared their own stories. Abandonment. Homelessness. Disrespect. The story became a movement. And somewhere, in the quiet heart of a broken town, a man who once walked into a bar for a beer realized he had started something bigger than himself. He had started a reckoning. It began with whispers. First, in online veteran forums. Then, in quiet barbershops, gas stations, town halls. People watched David's video and began to talk, not just about him, but about themselves. And like dry grass under a hot wind, the stories caught fire. But Maple Ridge wasn't just watching. It was reacting. David stood on the porch of his old house, watching a group of unfamiliar cars crawl slowly down the road. Windows rolled down, heads turned. Some nodded. Others didn't. He stepped inside, locking the door behind him with instinct, not fear. He'd been in too many places where silence came before the storm. In the living room, Logan paced. "They're starting to lean on Lena," he said. "Her landlord's threatening eviction. Someone cut her brake line last night." David's eyes narrowed. "Russo? He's spooked. The file you dropped stirred the hornet's nest. And from what I hear, he's pulling favors from people we've never even seen." David folded his arms. "Let him. We're not backing down." Logan cracked his knuckles. "I didn't come back from Mosul just to run from cowards with fat wallets." But still, the tension hung thick. David glanced at his corkboard on the wall, lines of red thread tying names to events, like a war map from a battle they hadn't trained for. Russo's face sat at the center. Around him, bank accounts, contractors, a shipping company with a falsified manifest, and 3 other discharged officers with sealed disciplinary records. "Where's Ryan?" David asked. "On the way. He's got something. Said it's big." David nodded. "We'll wait." But he didn't wait idly. He grabbed a folder Lena had left behind and flipped through the records, legal loopholes, financial transactions, and one photo that made his heart skip. A little girl, Middle Eastern, no older than 6, clutched a teddy bear, standing beside a burned-out school in Kabul. Behind her, a crate stamped with a logo. Iron Tap Exports. David's throat tightened. He remembered that school. He remembered the fire. The smoke. The screaming. And the crate they couldn't trace because it had gone missing in a clerical error. His fist clenched around the photo. This wasn't about beer anymore. It wasn't even about disrespect. It was about lives. And lies. Ryan arrived at dusk, his motorcycle growling to a stop in the gravel outside David's house. He wore a leather jacket and a crooked grin, but his eyes held the same haunted gleam they all carried. "Hope you've got whiskey," he said, stepping inside. "You're gonna need it." Logan tossed him a can of soda. "You're on meds, genius." Ryan shrugged. "Fine. But you're pouring it when this is over." He unzipped his backpack and laid out a tablet, unlocking files with a tap. "This is from a whistleblower in El Paso. She used to work logistics for Russo's contractor. She gave me sealed logs, private flights, black market weapons, civilian payouts to keep quiet." He pulled up one manifest. "Look at the dates. Every single one matches a supposed accident in Afghanistan or Syria. Explosions. Misfires. Civilian casualties. David leaned in. But they weren't accidents, Ryan said. They were weapons tests. Russo sold prototype munitions to warlords under the radar. Tested them in real villages, on real people. Covered them with doctored reports and ghost contracts. David stared at the screen, jaw locked. You sure about this? Ryan nodded. Bet my life. Logan stood silent, fists clenched. Then we expose him, David said. No, Ryan replied. We bury him. Meanwhile, in the center of town, Russo sat in his office above Iron Tap. His fingers drummed against the desk as he listened to a voice on the other end of a secure line. I don't care who they are, he snapped. I want them silenced. No more stories. No more press. And if the XSEALS keep poking around, make it look like an accident. He hung up. Then poured himself a drink. He didn't fear men like David. He feared what they knew. He thought of Jenkins. He thought of Fallujah. And he remembered how close they had come, years ago, to uncovering his operation. He had made sure the soldier who asked too many questions didn't return. But now, Jenkins' brothers had come home. And they were asking again. The next day, Lena met the team in an abandoned mechanic shop outside town. The place was musty and falling apart, but safe, for now. She dropped a heavy hard drive onto the workbench. This, she said, is the motherlode. She plugged it in. The screen blinked to life. Leaked from Russo's server. Audio recordings, internal emails, payout ledgers. She opened one file. Russo's voice crackled through the speakers. If they push again, send it through the shell companies. No names. Just keep the paperwork clean. I don't care what happens over there. They're not our people. David closed his eyes. Logan cursed under his breath. And Ryan stared, eyes sharp as knives. Lena paused the audio. This is enough to bury him. But not unless the right people hear it, David said. We leak it to the national press, Lena offered. The Post. ProPublica. Somebody with teeth. David shook his head. No. This doesn't go out as a story. This goes out as a reckoning. They devised a plan. Risky. Illegal in parts. But just. That night, David stood outside Iron Tap. The same bar where he'd been thrown out days ago. Now, he was back. He carried nothing but a small USB drive and the truth. Logan and Ryan waited in the truck. Lena had her camera ready. David stepped inside. The music stopped. Eyes turned. Russo looked up from behind the bar. Well, he said. Look who crawled back. David walked to the counter and placed the USB drive on the polished wood. This is everything, he said. Your lies. Your crimes. The kids you helped kill. You have one choice now. Run. Or confess. Russo laughed. You think I'm scared of some washed-up soldier? No, David said. You should be scared of what I've become. Then, he left. By dawn, the files were live. Shared by 1,000 voices. Veterans. Journalists. Lawmakers. Civilians. Congress opened an inquiry. Russo vanished. But the war wasn't over. For David, it had only begun. Because beneath the surface of one corrupt man, they'd uncovered something deeper. Project Orion. A black-budget program involving experimental weapons testing overseas, buried under military jargon and shadow agencies. Russo was just one head of the Hydra. And now that David and his team had struck one, the others would come hunting. But David didn't run. He sharpened his blade. Because this time, they weren't fighting for orders. They were fighting for justice. And no shadow, no lie, no silence would stop them. The morning air over Maple Ridge carried an eerie stillness, the kind that felt manufactured, too perfect, too silent. David stood by the shattered window of the old mechanic's garage, watching the frost melt from the windshield of Lena's car. Beneath that silence, he felt it. They were being watched. It had been 2 days since they leaked the files. 2 days since Russo disappeared off the grid. And in those 2 days, the world had changed. Reporters flooded the small town like crows to fresh carrion. Protesters marched along the highway shoulder, holding up signs with David's photo beside bold words, "Truth matters." But the celebration was short-lived. Because someone else was watching too. Not the press. Not Russo. But something darker. Project Orion. They hadn't meant to uncover it. That name had first appeared in the metadata of a single PDF Lena decrypted, a payment ledger with unusual black box redactions and a coded signature. Or 117 Gray Falcon. Logan had stared at it for hours. Ryan finally cracked it, or stood for Orion, and 117 was a reference to an experimental warfare protocol developed by a long-defunct research wing within the Defense Intelligence Agency. Defunct on paper, but very much alive beneath it. Inside the garage, the group gathered around an old wooden table. David dropped a manila envelope on it, thick with printouts and grainy photos. "This was mailed to me. No return address. No note. Just this." He spread the photos across the surface. Surveillance stills. Satellite captures. Documents with parts scribbled out in marker, but enough intact to raise chills. "What the hell?" Logan whispered, pulling one closer. Is this a lab?" Ryan leaned in. "More like a bunker." The images showed underground installations, one in Nevada, another in northern Syria. Men in suits. Scientists in hazmat gear. And cages. Small cages. Orion wasn't just about weapons, David said. It was about people. Lena opened a file. "This document lists detainees, noncombatants. Women. Kids. Used in impact field testing. They didn't just sell weapons to warlords. They tested prototypes on civilians in isolated regions. Syria. Sudan. Afghanistan." Ryan's face went pale. "They were lab rats." David nodded. "And Russo was their delivery boy." He handed over a final photo. A girl. Brown eyes. Blood on her cheeks. Standing in a burned-out clinic in Homs. She looked just like the girl from Kabul. "This one keeps showing up," David said. "Different places. Different years. Always near confirmed Orion strikes. She survived them all. And we don't even know her name." "She might be the key," Lena whispered. "She might remember everything." But before they could dig deeper, the power went out. In the entire garage. Then the cell service. David immediately stood up. "Grab everything," he ordered. "Now." They moved fast. Years of muscle memory took over. Logan yanked cords. Ryan swept hard drives into a backpack. Lena rolled up maps and stuffed documents into a duffel. Then they heard the sound. A low hum. Like a generator. But deeper. Darker. From outside, through the cracks in the boarded windows, they saw them. 3 black SUVs. No plates. No markings. The men who stepped out wore tactical gear. Matte helmets. No insignias. But David knew the type. Private military. Off the books. Kill squads. "Go out the back," David hissed. "Now." The next 5 minutes were chaos. They fled through the rear alley behind the garage, scaling a chain-link fence into the forested edge of town. The trucks didn't follow, but the men did. Logan held them off for a minute, just long enough for Lena to escape. They regrouped in an abandoned church on the far side of the train yard, breathless, bruised, but alive. Logan came limping in last, blood trailing down his sleeve. "I winged one," he muttered, grinning through the pain. "Bastard won't be aiming straight for a while." Ryan tossed him a field kit. "You sure they weren't feds?" David shook his head. "Too quiet. Too clean. These guys don't write reports." "So what now?" Lena asked. David knelt and spread the documents out again. "We follow the girl. Her trail led them to a name, Aliyah Khoury. A Syrian orphan, registered through a defunct UN database that had been scrubbed clean 2 years ago. But not clean enough for Lena to trace her to a refugee camp outside Istanbul, until that camp, too, had been raided and burned to the ground. "Someone's erasing her," Ryan said. "Every trace." "But why?" Logan asked. "Because she saw something," David replied. "They booked flights using burner IDs. They split into 2 teams. David and Lena would go to Istanbul. Logan and Ryan would dig through DC archives to chase the trail from the other end. Before they parted ways, David gave each man a look. "This ends with us. One way or another." Istanbul was a sea of stories. Narrow alleys. Call to prayer echoing between minarets. Smoke rising from grilled meat on every corner. David felt out of place here, but not disconnected. There was pain in these streets. He knew pain like that. Lena moved with determination, slipping through NGO offices, bribing local workers with American cash in silent desperation. They finally found an aid worker who remembered the girl. She was quiet, the woman said. But sharp. She would draw pictures. Hundreds of them. "Where is she now?" Lena asked. The woman hesitated. "I don't know. But she left this behind." She handed over a worn sketchbook. David opened it, and nearly dropped it. The drawings inside weren't childish. They were surgical. One page showed a facility, rows of beds with people strapped down. Another showed a logo, a stylized falcon overlaid with a triangle. David recognized it. Orion. But the final page chilled him the most. It showed a man. Bald. White coat. Face emotionless. Underneath, written in broken English. "The doctor who kills with dreams." Back in DC, Ryan and Logan found a matching reference buried in a CIA debrief report. Dr. Felix Gorman. A neuroscientist with dual clearance under DARPA and Orion. He specialized in neurological interference, weaponized trauma. The files suggested he conducted unauthorized tests on detainees using auditory hallucinations, sleep deprivation, and synthetic memories. But he had vanished in 2019. Somewhere in Eastern Europe. Ryan slammed the folder shut. "We've got to warn David." The text came through at 3:04 a.m. A photo. Aliyah. In a shadowed doorway, holding a candle. And behind her, the symbol of Orion, spray-painted on a concrete wall. The message. "She's here. But we're not alone." The next 48 hours unraveled like thread from a bomb jacket. David and Lena found Aliyah in the ruins of a hospital outside the Syrian border. She spoke little, but her eyes held galaxies of pain. She recognized David immediately. "You were there," she said, touching his hand. He froze. She pointed to a scar on his wrist. "I remember you." David felt the blood drain from his face. He had been stationed near Homs during the incident in 2016. He had been part of the extraction team. He had seen her before. Aaliyah, the girl in the rubble. The one who screamed when they pulled her from the wreckage. She never forgot, Lena whispered. Neither did I, David said. But the reunion was short. Because as night fell, the compound where they had came under assault. No uniforms. No language. Just bullets. David grabbed Aaliyah and ran. Lena fired from the window, covering them. It was hell all over again. But Aaliyah whispered something into David's ear as they fled, something that chilled him to his core. They said the sky would bleed before the end. And in the distance, a missile screamed into the desert sky. Not launched by any army, but by Orion. A test. Live. On a village. Again. The world hadn't changed. But David had. And now, it was time to make them pay. Wind howled across the scorched desert ruins, sweeping ash and fine sand into David's face as he staggered forward, cradling Aaliyah's trembling body against his chest. The missile strike had obliterated the northern edge of the village. What once stood as refugee housing was now a blackened crater still spitting heat and grief into the sky. Smoke spiraled like funeral ribbons. Behind him, Lena limped, one leg soaked in blood, her jaw clenched against the pain. Her gun was empty. Her eyes were not. They had barely escaped. The facility they'd taken shelter in, one of Orion's old listening posts, was gone. Flattened. As if it had never existed. A message, sent loud and clear. We know where you are. We know who you protect. You cannot stop us. But Aaliyah had survived. Somehow, the girl had stood up amidst the rubble, her voice rising like a whisper in a cathedral. He's awake again. David hadn't understood what she meant. Until he looked into her eyes. And realized. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a memory vessel. They found cover in a half-collapsed stable on the outskirts of the desert. Lena quickly set up a basic perimeter using debris and metal sheeting, rigging a tripwire grenade from what little remained in her pack. Inside, David laid Aaliyah down on a wool blanket and knelt beside her. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, her face softened. You were there, she murmured again. David nodded, his throat tight. Yes. You tried to pull me out. But he made you forget. David's hand froze. Who? She blinked slowly. The doctor with the white eyes. He said, we erase what we break. Even the soldiers. Lena looked up sharply. You're saying they, what? Wiped his memory? David's heart pounded. There's a blank in my record from 2016. An entire 72-hour window. I was told it was due to a head injury during combat. I believed it. He met Aaliyah's gaze. What did they do to us? Aaliyah's small fingers trembled as she reached into her coat pocket and drew out a folded piece of paper, creased and stained with soot. It was a diagram. Hand-sketched. Of a chair. Not just any chair, a medical one, surrounded by sensors, coils, electrodes. Notes scribbled in a child's handwriting labeled it. Echo table. Memories go here. Lena's breath caught. This is like the prototype they scrapped in 2013. Orion's neurological reprogramming trial. Aaliyah nodded. They tested it on me first. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Ryan and Logan burst into a dead-run sprint across the floodlit floor of an abandoned NSA substation in rural Maryland. Behind them, alarms wailed. Somewhere on the upper floors, boots clattered, feds. Private mercs? It didn't matter. What mattered was clutched in Ryan's hands, a black SSD drive, labeled only with a serial number and a single red word. Orpheus. They didn't stop until they reached their car, parked under a rusting tower. Logan jammed the key into the ignition and tore onto the dirt road as bullets sparked against the bumper. That better be worth it, he growled. Ryan didn't answer. He was already connecting the drive to his tablet, breath ragged. It booted up with a flicker, then displayed a simple phrase. Orpheus Protocol, final phase, pending integration. What the hell is the Orpheus Protocol? Logan asked. Ryan read the next line aloud, his voice shaking. Subject neural imprinting. Non-consensual memory fusion. Identity restructuring through dream state induction. He looked at Logan, horror dawning. They weren't just erasing people, they were building new ones. Back in the desert, Aaliyah began to tremble. David wrapped a jacket around her shoulders, but it wasn't the cold. It was her mind unraveling. He's in the dreams again, she whispered. Lena crouched beside her. Who? Aaliyah's voice dropped to a hush. The doctor. Gorman. He lives inside people now. He moves through the memories he changed. Like a ghost with hands. David blinked. What are you saying? Aaliyah turned toward him slowly. He's inside you, David. Silence. Total. Then Lena slowly reached for her sidearm, not pointing it, just holding it, just ready. David stepped back, disbelief crackling through him. No. That's not. But the moment she said it, he remembered something. Not a memory. More like a noise. A voice he'd been dreaming of since Homs. Bleed the past dry. And there's nothing left to hurt you. His knees buckled. Aaliyah clutched his hand. They said you were the first, she whispered. The first successful overwrite. But something went wrong. You kept remembering. That's why they tried to kill you. You're proof their machine doesn't work. Lena looked between them. Jesus Christ, if that's true, we have to shut it all down. David's voice was hollow. How? Aaliyah sat up, her voice clearer now. Stronger. We go to the core. Lena narrowed her eyes. Where? Aaliyah pointed to the paper again. On the back, scrawled in Arabic, was a location. Black Site 0. Romania. The group regrouped 2 days later in Athens. Ryan and Logan arrived first, nearly broken by what they'd uncovered. But the full briefing came only after Lena brought Aaliyah into the hotel suite. David stood at the window, watching ferries drift through the harbor. When Ryan finished his summary, the silence in the room was thick. So let me get this straight, Logan said. Orpheus is the final stage of Orion. Not just torture. Not just testing. But rewriting people. Erasing witnesses. Making soldiers out of survivors. Ryan nodded. And David was there first. David turned around, his voice quiet. They broke something in me. But they didn't break her. He looked at Aaliyah, sitting with a calm far beyond her years. We finished this, he said. Together. They landed in Romania under false names, crossing through back roads and abandoned airfields, until they reached the edge of the Carpathians. The coordinates led them to a decommissioned Soviet bunker carved into a cliffside. Guards patrolled the perimeter, dressed like utility workers, but moving like trained killers. They didn't plan an assault. They planned a resurrection. Aaliyah led the way. She remembered every corridor. Every shadow. Even the one where they first put her in the chair. The assault was surgical. Logan took out the cameras with time charges. Lena jammed the communications grid. Ryan released a false evacuation alarm through the system, triggering chaos on the lower levels. They moved fast. By the time they reached the central chamber, the core, they found it already activated. The chair. The coils. The upload system. And beside it, Dr. Gorman. Alive. Older. Smiling. I wondered how long it would take you to find me, David, he said, rising from the terminal. Aaliyah flinched behind David's arm. Gorman's voice was soft. Kind. Even now. You were my favorite, he said. You turned me into a ghost, David growled. I set you free, Gorman replied. You were a weapon of war. You needed purpose. David raised his gun. I found it. And shot him. Once. Twice. Gorman crumpled. But he laughed as he died. You'll never kill the program, he whispered. It lives inside all of you. They destroyed the chair. Every file. Every coil. Every record. They blew the core to hell. And buried Project Orion beneath the Carpathians. Aaliyah placed a photo on the rubble before they left, a picture she'd drawn, of her parents. Smiling. Whole. Alive in memory. The world didn't change overnight. But the ghosts stopped whispering. For now. And David? He started remembering. Not just the pain. But who he was. And why he chose never to forget again. It was raining the day they returned to America. Not the kind of rain that roared and clawed at rooftops like in the war zones they'd seen. This was a quiet, persistent drizzle, as if the sky itself mourned the memories lost and the souls that never made it home. David sat still on an old wooden bench in a suburban Seattle park, a cup of cold coffee resting between his palms. There were no more helicopters. No more screaming voices in his earpiece. Just the soft patter of rain on his jacket and the faint hum of a peaceful world he never thought could belong to him again. Across from him, Lena sat quietly, watching a young boy pedal his bike in circles through the square, laughing in the rain, blissfully unaware that the world had nearly disappeared because of a program called Orpheus. Aaliyah was at school nearby, her first real classroom, her first backpack, her first day where she didn't have to run or hide. For the first time, she could smile without fear, speak without being monitored, and dream without nightmares waiting to pull her under. Ryan and Logan were gone, back to Eastern Europe to hunt down the scattered remnants of the Orion program. No one knew where they were now, and maybe that was for the best. Because even though the core was destroyed, even though Gorman was dead, what the program had left behind wasn't something that could vanish with a single explosion. Orion was a scar on the human map. And scars, even when they stop bleeding, never truly go away. That night, David dreamed again. He was in a white room, an endless corridor with no doors, no light source, no sound but his own breath. The space around him pulsed like a dying heartbeat, and the air tasted like memory. Laughter echoed. Gorman's laughter. There were shadowy images, doctors without names, children screaming, wires connected to bodies too young to bleed like that. And in the middle of it all, he sat. Strapped to a chair. Plugged in. Redefined. We erased your pain, Gorman's voice echoed through the space. We gave you purpose. David looked into the phantom's eyes. You murdered me. No, Gorman smiled. We built you. The dream ended with a jolt, not from an explosion, but from a truth slashing through David's consciousness like a razor. A piece of it was still inside him. Not physical. Not digital. Neural. The next morning, he told Lena. Do you ever feel like something inside you didn't die when it should have? She nodded. Every time I close my eyes. They sat in silence. Then Lena said, Aaliyah needs someone to help her move on. And I don't think that person is us. Why not? Because we haven't moved on either. A week later, they took Aaliyah to meet someone Lena had once saved in 2018, Dr. Marianne Voss, a trauma memory therapist who had worked with child soldiers, war survivors, and abducted children. Voss didn't ask many questions. One look at Aaliyah's eyes, and she knew what the girl had seen. When Aaliyah entered the therapy room for the first time, she looked back at David, not afraid, not anxious. Just a small nod, like a goodbye to her old self. David stood there long after the door had closed. Weeks passed. David moved to a small cabin at the edge of an Oregon forest, where signals were weak, cameras were few, and the silence was honest. He spent his days writing down everything he could remember. Not to publish. Not to accuse. But to understand. Some nights, he still dreamed of Core. Some mornings, he woke up with blood in his mouth, though there was no wound. He wasn't healing. He was remembering. And one morning, he received a plain envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo, grainy, from a long-abandoned surveillance camera in the Core compound. In the corner of the image, a single file icon was circled. Orpheus Alpha, unwiped. On the back of the photo, a handwritten note. It's still there. Sublevel 3. Room 47. Waiting to be finished. That night, Lena found him standing on the hill above the cabin, eyes fixed west. "You're going back?" she asked. David nodded. "It has to end. You're not going alone." They looked at each other, and nothing needed to be said. Lena had once pulled him from rubble when his lungs were full of smoke and he thought it was over. She had stayed when everyone else disappeared. They weren't lovers. They were survivors. And this time, they would return. Not to fight, but to finish. December 2025. They returned to Romania, to the ruins of the Core facility, where death once hummed in the walls. Room 47 no longer had a lock. As if it had been waiting. Inside was a single drive, blinking weakly. David plugged it into a secured, air-gapped device with a cryptographic breaker Lena had built from scratch. The interface flickered to life. A prompt appeared. "Do you want to permanently delete all contents? This action cannot be undone." David placed his finger above the screen. He looked at Lena. She nodded. He pressed. "Yes." The drive clicked. A soft beep echoed in the room. And then, silence. No red lights. No alarms. Just the sound of it ending. They didn't celebrate. There were no flags. No parades. Only a single candle lit by David outside the Core ruins, set beside the photo Aaliyah had drawn once of a sunrise. The flame flickered against the cold wind, steady, defiant, like a vow. We remembered. And we did not forget. 3 months later. Aaliyah ran barefoot through the yard, notebook in hand. She was writing again, stories made from memory, not to relive pain, but to tell the world she survived. David and Lena sat on the porch, watching her. "Do you think there are more names out there?" Lena asked. David was quiet for a long time. "There are always more. And if Orpheus comes back?" David's jaw clenched. "We'll be waiting." And this time, they wouldn't run. Project Orpheus is gone, but its shadows still linger. The survivors did not return to glory. They returned to silence, healing slowly, not with vengeance, but with memory. They carry no medals, only scars, names, and the burden of truth. But the greatest act of resistance wasn't in destroying a secret lab or deleting a corrupted file. It was choosing to live. And now, as the sun rises over a world that will never fully know what was almost lost, one truth remains. Some stories survive, not because they're told, but because someone refuses to forget.